All righty. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this IoT webinar. You got Bob Hoke here. I am going to put up an agenda. We have 30 minutes. I think it's more than enough time. I wanted to keep it concise and give you a good idea without death by PowerPoint or kind of overkill. So we got introductions for myself, Chris, and Jason. A little bit about the goals of today's meeting. Chris is going to present the why, what, and how. And then Jason will go over a couple of use cases / case studies for a couple of different verticals, give you a good flavor in that sense. And then we'll do a little Q&A and kind of a wrap up. So, with that, so Bob Hoke, managing partner, digital business and IT consulting firm called Disruptive Innovations. I've been managing partner for about 5 years, been with the firm for about 5 years. Linked up with the CEO and founder, David Wright. Worked in another IT, telecom, and cloud consulting shop for 5 years prior to that. And then prior to that, it was about 13 or so years in investment banking, structured finance, and financial consultant. So I come with a little bit of a hybrid background between technology and finance. I'll just do the intros for Chris and Jason. Chris is a practice leader for advanced solutions and focuses on wireless technology and, of course, the Internet of Things. He's also the host of a podcast called The Wireless Way with Chris Whitaker. Can be found on most popular podcast platforms. His international show has various tech leaders discussing a wide range of solutions and topics. With me, I also have Jason Coffin. He's a sales engineer that specializes in cloud, mobility, and IoT. He has got certifications across the board, including Azure, AWS, 5G connectivity, and also LoRaWAN. He's assisted the discovery, design, and technical consultation of various deployments, along with cloud data infrastructures to map a complete solution to achieve positive business outcomes. So that's a little bit about us. Really the goal or the purpose of today's call is to give you, a good idea of what IoT means and some applicable real world use cases. So really, you could take it home with you and have an understanding of what IoT means, but also in your everyday course of business with prospects or personal professional life, you could maybe hopefully add some value to that conversation, in terms of this type of technology. For a little bit of a primer, what do we see in our everyday life with IoT, right? Well, the first and foremost is your iPhone. Well, some type of smartphone. I have an iPhone, which comes with it, tons of IoT devices embedded in it. You have your Bluetooth, things like Apple Pay, ticket scanning, just things we use in everyday life and we don't even realize it. You have your Apple Watch, you have other smart wristbands. How about our vehicles, right? I mean, how many different beeping sounds do you hear? I mean, it's annoying almost in my SUV, the amount of different alerts that I get. All of that, is IoT, and Chris will give more of a definition and dig into that, in a bit more. Your house, right? Smart refrigerators. Those of you that have the Nest or some type of smart thermostat. Light switches. Now, you got your Google Home, your Amazon Echo. Right, all of those are IoT devices. But what we're going to spend the next 20 or so minutes is really IoT in the business sense. Whether it's barcode, RFID readers in the retail space or connected healthcare. We're going to look at that. We're going to look at smart supply chain management, smart farming, the hospitality space, all the use cases in hotels, and so on. So we'll take a deeper dive into that, and then. But we won't talk about too much. Maybe we will. Extend it to cities, right? You have smart buildings, right? Energy efficient commercial and residential buildings. You have grids that are set up, littered with IoT devices, and what that creates. What it really creates is a reduction, is efficiency, right? It's a reduction of waste, a reduction of cost ultimately, and really creates an overall. I think what it really creates is an overall better experience for humans and really to planet Earth. At least that's my view, right? So, with that, I'm going to hand it off to Chris Whitaker, who's going to take it a couple of levels deeper than that. So, hold on to your seats.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. The next 10 minutes or so, I hope to just kind of give you the basic why, what, and how. And then Jason's going to follow up with even more hows and whats. But this is kind of the beginning of the conversation. Hopefully something we say will hit a nerve or hit a point that you're interested in. Of course, DI, we can help you go deeper into all these categories. Let's go to the next slide. Glad to be here with you guys today. Thanks for making time. So, to kind of kick us off, welcome to the fourth industrial revolution. That's where we are. And if you're anything like me, when I first heard of this a couple of years ago, I'm like, well, gosh, what were the first three? And why is this a big deal? Go to the next slide, if you would. And this is it. If you just think about the impact each of these revolutions had on humankind and business, the ability to make money. We went from muscle power to steam engines, just looking at what the steam engine did for society. And then think where we went with electricity catapulted us into this next generation and grew and grew. Just think where we wouldn't be talking about any of this about electricity. And then of course the computer age was really, that's also the internet age. Again, we wouldn't be talking about any of this if it wasn't for this revolution. So if you just think about the impact each of those has had on humanity and the ability to do business. Now we're in this fourth one. In the next slide, you'll see it's kind of combining the best of breed of everything. Computers historically only really do what humans tell them to do. We put the software in there, we type in inputs. Yes, and we're lucky it can calculate, do some great calculations. But now we're at a point where instead of computers talking to humans, computers are talking to computers. Originally this was machine to machine. The term Internet of Things was coined in 1999 by a guy named Kevin Ashton. He was just trying to convince his board of directors why it was so important at Procter & Gamble to put in sensors for asset tracking. And he knew they understood the internet in 1999, but that's about as far as it was in 99. But making the Internet of Things, now it kind of paints this picture, right? It kind of helps us all, like Bob was talking, there's all these things connected to the internet. Sometimes we just take for granted. But what's the value, the why and the how and the why? Let's go to the next slide. Jared Newman's a technology journalist that I like to follow. And I like his quote here. And just like any company that blissfully ignored the internet at the turn of the century, the ones that dismissed the Internet of Things risk getting left behind. So I'm glad you guys are here with us today because you're not going to get left behind. But that's a true story. I have a lot of examples of how people just kind of dismiss technology and then they lost their competitive edge. Next slide, let's go ahead and jump into the definition. And if you Google IoT, or if you've been around IoT for a while, or maybe you're just as well versed in this as I mean, there's a lot of ways you can define it. I like this one. If you just look at the keywords, if you just drop all the other words, but applications are things, collecting data are events, generating insights, translating into actions, and then implemented to improve a business or a process. That's the goal here. And I'm going to break down the four pillars in a moment. Before I do that, Bob mentioned the refrigeration sensor, and this is a very, very commonly used example, I feel like, but it really gets the point home. If you think about most commercial places where you have restaurants or where the health department has to come and inspect, or even hospitals where they have vaccines and medicines, or school systems, they have cafeterias where they have dairy and meat products. All these places are required to show they're tracking the temperature to ensure there's no foodborne illness or people won't get sick. Well, how we've done that for generations was a clipboard on a nail and a thermometer in the refrigerator or the freezer. What's the problem there? It's low tech. It works most of the time. Well, a couple of problems. We know people get, lazy or get busy and they don't check it. And if they are checking it, it's only telling you the temperature at that exact moment. You don't need to know it because you're standing there. It's working. So with sensors, obviously, there's smartphone apps, computer graphical user interfaces. It tells you real time by the minutes when the health department shows up. You can just print off this report and everyone's happy. But let's talk about that a little bit further. There's a lot more sensors that can be involved in this exact use case of the door's closed, the temperature's rising, what's going on there? Well, maybe the power's out. This is a real story. It happened with a school system. The power went out over the weekend. They come in Monday morning, all the food's spoiled. You could put a sensor on there for voltage detection. Is the power on? Great. So the power's on, the temperature's rising. Oh, well, the door's open because they're reloading it. They're resupplying it with meat and dairy. So you can have a door open sensor or even a motion sensor in there. Great. The door's closed, the power's on, the temperature's still rising. Well, you can have a preventive maintenance sensor for the HVAC on the actual cooling system to make sure it's working properly. So just those 4 or 5 sensors alone for one use case. And again, this is just one example of what could be thousands. We don't have time to go into them today, but I think that paints the picture. Let's go to the next slide and unpack this a little further. And you could go ahead and build this out. This should be 4 taps there. I like to call these the 4 pillars. It's a complex conversation. This is not really a technology conversation. So when you look at, in your own business, identifying, what kind of business outcomes are you looking for? Where in your operating budget would you like to have more visibility into, or like to streamline into? Again, it's not a technology conversation. Yes, at some point, once we identify the outcomes and the problems in the business, we'll pivot into a technology conversation, but really it's more of a solution conversation. Does it really matter how it works? What matters is it works and it's secured. Security is a big part of this conversation as well. Improving E&E. I love this part. To me, this is the most exciting part about Internet of Things. When you think about your business, how efficient and effective are you? Could you be more efficient and effective? I haven't really talked to a business leader yet that says, no, we're good. I don't think we could be any more efficient or effective. The goal is always, unless you're just, king of the castle or queen of the castle and you own the market, we can always do more when it comes to competitive angles and edge and provide a better outcome. And ultimately, we're not trying to buy technology. We're trying to, as business leaders, we want to buy the right outcomes. What kind of outcome are we looking for? And for every business, that could be a different answer. Providing the business intel and analytics. I love that third column as well, because not only are you becoming more efficient and effective, but much like that refrigeration example, you're getting real-time actionable data. And the word actionable is important because there is a lot of data being collected. And unless you have the right, software, the right vendors and suppliers, it may be for naught. I mean, you want to be able to collect the data that gives you insight, gives you the information you need to make good business decisions, forecast properly, show that you're in compliance, et cetera. And I think by doing those first 3, a properly deployed IoT solution or any kind of wireless solution, it provides a positive ROI every time. For example, the refrigeration monitoring, there was a use case I saw with a hospital where they were having, professional medical staff, generally 6-figure employees, checking that thermometer and writing down the temperature. Maybe it only took 2 minutes or a minute per time, but they're doing it 4 or 5 times a shift, 12-hour shifts over 7 days. It was thousands of dollars a year that they've calculated in labor costs just to check the thermometer. Well, when you put a sensor in it, it can do it for hundreds of dollars a year. So you can see how almost immediately you're seeing thousands of dollars in ROI there. That's just one example of many. Go to the next slide, please.
Sure.
I won't hit on this too long, but I love this slide as well because it shows you all the different areas of why it matters. I just lost my slide here, but there we go. Removing that manual process, human error, decreasing waste and cost. And at the end of the day, it's all about the outputs. What is the output for your customer, your end customer, and for your budget and your operational efficiencies. Again, I've never met a business leader yet that does not want to improve upon the outcomes and the maintenance, increasing output and safety, and of course, adding quality control and asset tracking. So I think you get the idea of how you can make a business healthier, more profitable by using these technologies. Next slide, please. This is just something I want to throw in there. I'm seeing this pop up more and more. I'm sure most of your business have probably heard or seen this. It's not like it's a law or anything, but a lot of financial organizations are using this compliance mindset of assigning a value to a business. How are you environmentally, social, and governance? How do you grade yourself in each of those categories? I think with IoT, 2 of those categories can easily be monitored and tracked, and that would be the environmental and the governance. There's a lot of this technology and sensors gives you that actionable data. And as Bob kind of alluded to, a lot of IoT, the whole goal is, it's not only good for business, a lot of it is good for our environment. You're tracking water usage and waste, electricity usage and waste. A lot of these have a trickle down effect of being a positive outcome. Just something to think about there. Next slide as I wrap up. We're talking a lot about Internet of Things and IoT, but I'll be remiss if I didn't mention it's a little bit about mobility. All kind of wireless solutions. There's most IoT sensors have a SIM card in them. There's a very thin line between mobility and the IoT conversation, but they are 2 different conversations. And And if you want to talk more about these, schedule a follow-up appointment with Bob and DI. We can go into them definitely, but for managed mobility, you can outsource a lot of these tasks that most companies are spending a lot of time and energy on mobility. You know, if you have over 100 devices in the field, how are you keeping up and auditing your expenses? You know, the help desk services, who's making sure that these devices are secure, the company information on them is secure. If an employee loses an iPad or an iPhone or smart device, you know, is there any risk there? It goes on and on. You know, the managed Wi-Fi, a lot of managed Wi-Fi solutions are used for sensors, but they're also used for end users, you know, the laptops and the iPads and what, and the tablets. If you have an office building and you have poor signal in there, I mean, we've all been frustrated with that. You're trying to expect an important phone call and you have to go into this elevator, or you're in the middle of the building and there's no cell signal. Well, there's a solution for all of these you see on this. And these are the ones we've had the most conversations with this year. Next slide, please. So just a few things to consider, you know, as this is where we can come in, we can help you vet all these items out, you know, who's going to install it, you know, what kind of service calls are there for these IoT sensors I've been mentioning. There's all kinds of cameras, smart cameras. It's not always a thermometer sensor. There's a lot of different sensors. And the latest technology, that's something else we can help advise. There's so many new versions of technology coming out regularly. We often have to check and say, hey, is this going to be sunsetted soon? I don't want to deploy this to find out that next year it's going to be no good. We got to support, you know, what kind of battery life. That's something that's often overlooked, but there's just a lot of details. I don't want to make this sound very simplistic and easy, although, you know, if you do it for a living, it kind of is, but there's also a lot of complexities involved. And you can hear from Jason here in a moment about all the different areas of use cases. And it always comes down to the expertise. I mean, business owners know their business. Unless their business is IoT or technology, oftentimes there's no one on staff that could really effectively help deploy these, manage these, and ensure that they're working properly. So all things to keep in mind as you go down this technology journey. Next slide.
Excellent.
I'll
Thank
hand
you,
it over
Chris.
to you, Jason. Thanks.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Chris. All right. So yeah, we'll dig into some of the use cases. And one of the first points I do want to point out is not all use cases are currently defined. A lot of the technology and use between different use cases is the same, you know, using the same sensors, the same data. It's just depending on what the outputs that you are looking from a business to get that data that you need to make those decisions. So you see some of these will look the same, even though they're used for different use cases. So next slide, please. So the first one we'll talk about is healthcare. So the first value right there you see is monitor the patients without visiting the doctor. So this actually was an interesting conversation where I had a conversation with a home health owner, and she was actually looking into fuel management, which we'll get into next. She was saying that rising gas prices are killing her business because the nurses have to drive to each person's house, perform the test, you know, report on diagnostics and give it back. So then we started talking about it like, hey, what would actually solve the problem the best? Would it be making sure that your nurses aren't driving sporadically, make sure that they're not overgoing and overcharging the mileage to the company, or have that end user actually have something that's connected over cellular and report back that they can perform themselves that they have been doing their entire lives? You know, those blood pricks, the blood pressure sensors, all that different type of stuff that they can do on their own can heavily offset how much resources and, you know, including hourly employees, that nurses aren't cheap, and then also the fuel to get there, offsetting that technology as well, all into, you know, an IoT solution. So that was a big one that came up from a different type of conversation. You know, we're talking about those use cases that you start a conversation about one thing, it ends up being another. Predictive maintenance of machines. A lot of healthcare machinery is very expensive. Think of, you know, now they're starting to do that wireless technology, 5G through a hospital to where they actually have robotic surgeons. You know, imagine if that thing has a little extra vibration on it, that incision is not going to go very well. So having something on there that tells them, you know, checks the internal devices like, hey, there's a problem, but you also have an external device that says, hey, there might be a problem that the internal device didn't see. That's a high-end piece of equipment that needs double checking. And also cargo tracking. So those x-ray machines, you know, the defibrillators, on average, most hospitals lose, not, you know, get stolen or anything like that or get damaged, but lose because it goes outside of a certain department or outside of a certain room. They lose $200,000 a year on average of equipment. So imagine that return on investment by just geo-tracking that or locking it in a specific area to where somebody can't move it to another area. So, you're looking at how IoT can solve a lot of these issues. And Chris already touched on the refrigeration piece of it from a food perspective, but think about all these medications. A lot of medications go bad even in transit. So it doesn't have to be at a physical hospital or a care center, but in transit in the vehicle to make sure that they remain in a certain temperature from source to destination and also remain at that temperature. We just had a hurricane blow through Florida. The hospital was the first thing that had power come back online, but even if the generators failed, what's the first thing they want to monitor besides the actual patients is the stuff that needs to remain cool within those refrigeration units. All right, next slide. So here we're going to touch on the transportation and fleet part of it. I kind of touched on it where that one in-home nursing company, actually ended up being actual in-home devices. But fleet tracking and route optimization is huge right now. We saw what a 100 to 150% increase in fuel prices that hits transportation companies hard. And once they figured out, not only is the cost of goods going into their business, which is the fuel, but also actually their drivers were going on their own routes. They were using company data. By that data, I mean trucks and fuel to do their own dispatching, and driving off, taking roundabout routes to their destinations. They were finding they were losing a lot of money on this stuff. So now they can monitor the route that people are going. They can dynamically change it if they're finding traffic on those routes, but then they can also make sure that drivers aren't heavy stopping, gunning it around corners. They're not distracted by eating or smoking, drinking, anything that you don't want to do behind the wheel, because now you can also detect if somebody's texting and all that stuff. It has the AI built into it to figure that out on its own and then send reminders, automatically to the driver and then also to their supervisors. But there's a lot of cool stuff that's going on in this industry, and it's not just monitoring the port that's underneath the dash to say that, hey, this car needs an oil change in 20 miles. You could do a whole lot more stuff as well. Next slide. So hospitality, I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but in a lot of counties and states, it's actually mandatory to have panic buttons in rooms. Hotel staff to ensure safety, the actual residents themselves. So having a panic button, that's a mandatory compliance thing. That's also something to be sourced as well, whether it's a wearable or if it's something on a wall. So we're designing a lot of those currently right now. Automation in rooms. So making sure, you're not wasting that electricity, maximizing the margins on that room itself. One thing to note that's actual use case that we had is a hotel was giving a bunch of rewards points to members because somebody would call and just say, hey, I didn't have hot water this morning. What's the first thing they're expecting if they're on a business account there? They're expecting points. They don't want to reimburse for that room. They want points for later. So if you could put on that shower, hey, we actually saw your temperature was 103 degrees on that water, you automatically have that data right in front of you to where you combat that person that's asking, hey, I want that free stuff that's coming in. So not only is it from a security perspective, but also making sure you're not handing out free stuff all the time. Next slide. So industrial, we touched on this quite a bit, the preventative maintenance. One thing that, we talked about big, heavy machinery, where it's at, when is it going to break down, vibration, make sure that air quality is perfect in a factory. But one thing that industrial doesn't include on here that people don't think of is think of a city. If that bridge that you're monitoring and it's the only way in and out of a specific island, I have a lot of those around my hometown. If that bridge has certain vibration, they know it's going to break down in a specific area. Those people can't get to their houses in and out. How would you like to have somebody go do preventative maintenance on that bridge rather than wait for it to break down while it's up where people can't get in and out? So it has many different use cases that you can use all this industrial type IoT to proactively monitor and fix problems before they happen. Next slide. So to touch on some of the top verticals that we were mentioning, the panic button is huge because it's actually a mandatory thing to have. The high dollar asset tracking, because you get immediate ROI, whether you're geo tracking into a specific area, tracking it for preventative maintenance. There's many things that go into that to where somebody doesn't have to go and do a bunch of check boxes, put their hand on it, see if it's vibrating. You actually get some true data out of it. the residential commercial smart buildings. So not only is it from a low cost perspective, saving money on electricity, but also now a lot of these commercial buildings are being changed to high-end residential buildings with all this physical security, monitoring to minimize the electricity usage, putting all this fancy technology in there and charging more for rent. So we actually have, people that say, hey, let me actually make your building more valuable. Not let me cut your costs, but let me make your stuff more valuable. Connected communities. We're actually doing a lot of smart cities now to where, you have a connected app that takes you through, lets you know, wait times in specific areas, make sure you're always connected. A big one up top is the EV chargers. So now EVs are a big thing, and there's a lot of tax benefits coming out of that. But what can you also do from a digital signage point of view? So you can actually get ad revenue on those EV chargers or standalone and make money off of it. So it's not just something that you're saying, hey, you need to pay for this. You're actually going to make money off of this by being paid from an ad company. All that's already set up. So you can charge not only for the electricity that's being used on the vehicles, set how much you want to charge, but you can also get ad revenue. So there's multiple ways to make money there. And then AI from the video. So not only do you have to, everybody thinks of, hey, from a security company, they're sitting in a specific room watching all these cameras together. Now you can have AI that identifies certain things and then reacts depending on what happens from that base scenario. So facial recognition, license plate recognition. If you have people that actually have an issue of saying, hey, that thing's recognizing my face, you can do people recognition. There's even companies out there that can recognize a Nissan versus a Mazda versus a Toyota. So you can get super granular and then react based on what those findings are. Near misses from people getting hit in a smart city, those types of things. I know we're running out of time, so I want to make sure that we get to our next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. You kept that pretty much on the nose. So I appreciate that, and kind of going over those various use cases of verticals where it's most applicable. So I know, we probably could have made this an hour, at least 45 minutes. So with that, if there's any Q&A, you guys could just unmute your mic. I'll give you 30 seconds, 40 seconds, and otherwise I had a question or two. Maybe if we run a few minutes over, I appreciate your time. If you have to go, that's okay as well. Any questions from the crowd?
Thank you. Hello, Bob.
Yep. Hey.
And couple of little simple questions. Do you do the full service, not just the, you almost have to have an AI and a center managing these devices if you have a lot of them, right? So do you have a service to manage the devices themselves? Because that adds a lot of extra weight on top of I'm coming from healthcare, so the 2,000 or 3,000 medical devices that a small or mid-sized hospital will have. If they start putting all of this on that, they are going to need a way to centrally manage that. And so that's one question. And the second one would be, and I know we don't have that much time, the security of the devices, the cyber aspect of it. Those are two that popped in my head. So.
Okay. Yes. So short answer to your question, yes, we have options to do the sensor standalone, build the data standalone, but most of them come around the managed service piece of it to where, you're paying just the monthly for the sensors, the network, and the network piece will come back to your security part of it where it's most of them are completely air gapped. So you have a network gateway that sits on premises that uses a cellular connection that goes back to, wherever the data is being housed. But all that is AES 256 encrypted. But it's also air gapped from the rest of the network. The sensors, the network gateway don't even have a Wi-Fi card in them. So there's no way for it to attach to the local network. Now, that's the preferred way. There's also ways to integrate with the existing network to where we want to start talking about, virtual separation and stuff like that. But for the preferred method, it's basically just separate it physically. Happy to have a follow-up conversation on that as well. Great question.
Thank you.
Great. Anybody else?
Yes, thanks, Bob. This is Victor. Good
Hey,
to see you.
How you doing?
And thanks to Jason, Chris, and yourself for inviting me and presenting this.
Welcome.
I wanted to get a sense of the data part. Are you actually a data platform that performs analytic services from these devices? So in other words, do you provide that type of service to the device clients?
Yes.
If you-
So,
Good.
oh, sorry.
They're good. Good.
Okay. Yeah. So, so a lot of this stuff is generally based on an underlying technology from AWS or Azure. They have their own IoT practices. A lot of companies have applications that they've home built that just recognizes the sensors. They register via keys, whether it's application network keys, and then identifies them. And think of the sensors just being another form of data gathering, to where, you know, we've all had software packages that ingested a bunch of data. Think of a SIM tool, you know, just a bunch of data and decides what to do with it. These data factories, they're just ingesting data from these sensors to say vibration levels, air quality, you know, whatever the use case is. And then that data is taken to either do some form of admin with it. So do this task once it hits here, doing, you know, an application does this task, or show me this type of data and then manipulate it to show something this way. So again, it goes from whatever the business objectives are, and you don't have to keep the data where it's being resided from the provider itself. It has to, you know, you can ingest it into whatever you have locally there. So it can have a couple different places. It can stay where it's being loaded to initially, or it can be ingested into whatever applications you guys are using internally.
Mhm.
But yes, all the AI can be done on the side before it's ingested or displayed.
And so that in some ways enhances and in some ways relieves the burden of privacy compliance, HIPAA and such.
Oh, correct. Yes.
Right, because
Yeah, so
what I think I heard you say was that your solution, the data plus the sensor, can only reside, for example, in Robert's case, in the hospital and not touch your platform.
right, it's just being a transport medium. So just hits it and then goes to the hospital, and then that's it. It's immediately deleted off of the platform. So there's multiple ways to hit whatever compliance that you're looking at.
All right, and to again, if you'd indulge me, Robert, to use your example of a hospital for things that are not HIPAA related, like the heavy iron utilities, that could be processed at on your platform to get analytics about either energy usage or reliability or flagging for routine maintenance and that kind of thing.
Yes, yeah, all that stuff part of the discovery process. See what the data sovereignty requirements are. So whether it's sovereignty on premises, in the cloud, your systems, so all that stuff goes into it. But there's a lot of flexibility on where the data actually resides. Just routing.
Interesting business model. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Victor. We're a few minutes over. Any other questions? I had one or two, but you guys hit it. It was really on the data analytics and on the security. So appreciate those questions. And I'm going to send out as a follow-up, you know, an email version probably, the slides and a link to the presentation. I'll get that out to everyone. So you know, in case folks missed it, or for you guys and gals that are on, you'll at least have a copy for your reference.
Hey, Bob, Sala had a question again, just to kind of address real quick. It's a good point. We kind of hit on security in general, but all these devices.
Oh, I missed it. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. I got you back, man. That's what I'm here for. Yes, a great question. So, you know, it's not uncommon, you know, for having a over-the-top cybersecurity solution in addition to an IoT solution, right? Jason, if you want to add anything to that, but that is paramount. Most of the most recent hacks I was looking for generally originated from unsecured IoT sensor potentially. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Jason, or Saul, if that answered your question.
No, that answered my question. Sorry, I had one more before I log off. You know, with IoT devices, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
You know, what would you say to the manufacturer who's weary about the subscription model, you know, for collecting the data, using per user? You know, I mean, this morning I was just at a advancing AI seminar in which I'm in Wisconsin, in which, you know, the talk is the cost of these things and how do we even get started? And I have all this data that you told me to collect 5 years ago. Now what do I do with it? You know, like there's so many questions. So for a small to medium size manufacturing company that knows they have to move, they've got the data, but they're also thinking of the costs. Where do they even begin? and then this to like, okay, great, I've got this thing you can use. Have you thought about subscription model? And their clients are like, what? How do I do that? Pay-per-use, without sounding like, oh, because we cannot stay there. We need to move.
Right. I just a few comments on that, and then Jason, if you want to add, but the one thing I love about the subscription model of a managed solution, first of all, as we've already identified, a lot of this technology every 6 to 12 months, it's outdated. So when you're in a subscription model and you don't necessarily own all the sensors, in fact, in a lot of the models you can do OpEx and CapEx. You can do the OpEx on the subscription for the software, but then the CapEx, you can go out and buy it. They can buy and own all the sensors, but then they own them, right? Then what? There's a warranty on them, but at some point they'll be outdated. So a lot of the subscription models make everything operational expenses and OpEx. That means that they'll just keep up doing a technology refresh every time, with a contract renewal and whatnot, and it keeps up the latest and greatest of technology. I don't know, any other thoughts, Jason, on pros of subscription versus doing it all in-house?
Yeah, it's more how much do they want to take on internally? Like they're already talking about, hesitation to do a digital transformation in the IoT space. How much do they want to go invest and find the resources that are knowledgeable and capable of doing this? I mean, go and find somebody that already has it. That's relatively expensive. We're all knowing the Great Resignation and everything right now, same problems we're having in the cybersecurity realm. But if they want to build it in-house, that's going to take somebody time to stand up. They're going to run into a point where they hit I don't know. So the subscription model ensures that you always have that backing to where somebody knows how to use the system. If somebody leaves that company, that's on them. They still have SLAs that they need to make sure that they have resources to ensure the system's online, providing the data that's needed. But also taking a lot of that upfront capital expenditure and building it into a residual OpEx payment. So a lot of companies don't want to fork up the budget to just throw all this equipment in there and then pay for a small monthly, but they have that capability of doing it if that's the way they prefer to do their budget. But a lot of times when budget season comes around, it's I have this money that I need to spend it, but I don't have that much to go out and purchase everything new. So it's something that you have a scalable process where you're like, oh, we have another piece of equipment. Okay, well, that's going to be this much more money a month in order to monitor that and throw it into the managed service because it's already built and ready to rock and roll. It's not, oh, we need to go, $10,000 for this, $20,000 for this. It's, hey, we need to go buy this. We can either buy this sensor for $150 and monitor it for 10, or we can do $20 a month and do the whole thing. And it's all warranted.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, some.
Some, okay.
I'll be in touch with you guys.
Well.
Yeah, we can talk
Yes.
more. Yep. Yeah, we can
Yeah,
talk more offline.
yeah.
Yep. You got it. All right, great. And hey, I guess we got to do close to an hour next time. So I guess that's some additional feedback right there. But again, I appreciate everyone's time for joining the call. I'll get this out to the folks that joined and folks that couldn't make it. And then looking forward to talking more in the future. All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.